A year ago, I was sitting in Spain wondering how I was going to make this life work. I had made the decision to come here without a perfectly clear plan, and suddenly the reality of that choice felt very real. There was excitement, of course, but there was also a lot of uncertainty. I didn't know how things will unfold. I didn't know if I will actually be able to build a life here. And I didn't know if trusting my instincts like that will eventually prove to be brave or careless. And that's when I started understanding something about courage that we don't talk about enough. Because there's a kind of courage that we rarely recognize. Not the kind that looks impressive from the outside. I mean the quiet one, the quiet that happens when no one is watching. The kind that shows up in the small decisions that you make every day. How you take care of yourself, how you respond to uncertainty, how you keep moving forward, even when you don't know exactly where things are going. Hi, I'm Ambar, and this is Ambar in real life. This podcast is my space to share the journey of becoming. Through honest reflections, personal stories, and conversations with people in my life who have shaped who I am. From health and self-worth to love, career, and everything in between, I'm here to speak what's true and sometimes comment on some of my posts that I've written on my blog, Ambar Virtual. If you are on your own path of growth and craving real connection, welcome. You're not alone. Hi, and welcome to Ambar in Real Life, the podcast where we explore personal growth, emotional clarity, and what it really means to live life with love, intention, and perspective. I'm your host, Ambar, and if you have been following along, you'd know that over the last few episodes, I've been reflecting a lot on courage, the kind that shows up in everyday moments, in the choices we make, the conversations we have, and the ways that we learn to take care of ourselves. And in many ways, this reflection feels like a continuation of that journey because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stop trying to control everything and trust that life is unfolding the way it needs to. Because during that season of uncertainty for me, one of the first things that I did to center myself again was something I have relied on for years and something that I pretty much talk about all the time now. I resumed writing reflections for my blog the same way that I used to do when I was younger and trying to understand my life a little better and myself and my emotions. Writing has always been a kind of free therapy for me. It helps me slow down my thoughts, put words to what I'm feeling, and start seeing things from a different perspective. When everything feels uncertain externally, writing helps me reconnect internally. And as I kept writing and reflecting during that time, another realization started to surface. A lot of the healing work that I've been doing over the past few years began showing up more clearly in my everyday life. I started noticing something about the way people around me talked about their lives because many of them already had things that I used to dream about having, stability, comfort, opportunities that on paper looked really good. And yet, a lot of their conversations were filled with complaining. Nothing was ever quite enough. There was always something missing. And observing that made me pause and ask myself a very honest question. How do I want to experience my life right now? Because when I looked at my own situation, I understood something important. Yes, things were uncertain, and yes, I didn't have everything figured out. I wish. But I was also already living parts of my life that I used to pray for. I was in Spain. I had opportunities to grow. I had the freedom to explore who I was becoming. Not perfectly, not comfortably all the time, but it was real. And in that moment, I made a conscious decision. Instead of focusing on everything that was still unclear, I was going to start focusing on what was already present. Gratitude became a choice. Not because everything was perfect, because they were not, but because I didn't want to live inside the same cycle of constant dissatisfaction that I was seeing around me. And that shift changed the way I moved through that season of uncertainty. Looking back now, it's interesting to see that many of these shifts happened toward the end of last year. In November, I decided to participate in something that I have never done before. There's a therapist I have followed for years who organizes a yearly journaling challenge. And for the first time, I decided to join. So every day during that month, I received a new reflection prompt by email. And every day, I sat down and wrote. Sometimes it was easy. Other days, it took way longer than I expected. But slowly, it became a daily habit. And by the time December arrived, I was already in a very reflective mindset. And as the year was coming to an end, I found myself thinking deeply about everything that had happened over the previous months, what I have learned, what had changed inside of me. And during those reflections, I started noticing something very clearly. Every time I surrendered a little more to faith, every time I trusted God's timing instead of trying to control everything myself, I felt lighter, more peaceful, more grounded. And that realization stayed with me because earlier in the year, I had already made a decision that was very important for me. I had decided that protecting my peace was going to be a priority in my life. But toward the end of the year, that's when I truly started practicing it, not just as an idea, but as a way of living. And then something else happened that brought everything full circle. Recently, the government announced a new legal process that could help people in situations like mine. And when I read about it, the first thing I felt was relief, a deep sense of relief, because the timeline that I have mentally prepared myself for, the amount of time I thought that I would have to spend figure this thing out, not seeing my family, suddenly became much shorter. And after that relief came gratitude. Gratitude for the opportunity, gratitude for the people who had supported me along the way, gratitude for the way things were unfolding in ways I could never have planned myself. But the realization that stayed with me the most came just a little later, because even before this opportunity appeared, something inside me had already changed. For most of the past year, a quiet pressure had been sitting in the background, the feeling that I needed to prove I had made the right decision by coming here, that somehow I had to justify the risk, show that it was worth it. But when I stepped back and looked at everything that had happened, the growth, the lessons, the people I have met, the ways I have changed, I saw something different. I realized that I didn't need to fight life so hard anymore. So before we close today's episode, I would like to leave you with a few questions to reflect on this week. Sometimes when life feels uncertain, it's so easy to focus only on what's still missing, or what hasn't happened yet, or what hasn't worked out yet. But often, when we pause and look a little closer, we realize that some of the things we once hoped for are already present in our lives. And that recognition can open the door to something deeper. Trust that the rest of the path will unfold in its own time. So here are the questions that I have for you this week. First, where in your life are you trying to control the outcome so tightly that it's creating more stress than peace? Second, what is something in your life right now that you once hoped or prayed for, but may not be fully appreciating anymore? And third, what would it look like this week to trust the process of your life a little more instead of trying to force the next step? Remember that you don't need to answer these questions perfectly, just let them sit with you. Because sometimes the most meaningful insights come when we simply give ourselves space to breathe and reflect. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen and reflect with me today. If you know someone navigating change silently, this might meet them where they are, so please consider sharing it with them. If this episode resonated with you, I would love to hear from you. You can reach out on Substack or Instagram or share your reflections in the comments. I read every single message. Please consider subscribing if this space felt safe. I would love to have you around. And until next time, please take care of your mind, please take care of your body, and please take care of your heart. Bye.